And welcome back to V-Road, CCTCG's weekly Vanguard Podcast. I'm Cole.
And I'm Trey.
And today we've got another, what I've liked to call a nation know-how. And those are meant to be a little reference point or like a tool to help you figure out what a nation does if you're not familiar with it, be it the decks in it and the overall playstyle of the nation. And today we've got Brandt Gate, which we're both pretty big fans of, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of those decks, to say the least. So I think you could say we're definite fans.
Yep, definitely. Early in my life as a standard player for Vanguard, I wanted to have every Brandt Gate deck, and I did do that for a while. I had the first three that ever came out all at the same time, and then I guess I kind of dropped off at like set 5 or so. But for a while, it was great to be somebody who liked Stargate back in the day, because now that they took like a small 3-clan nation and just bloated it into something that is arguably pretty unique in Vanguard.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of play styles that have kind of gotten, I mean, between moving from G and V into standard, taking 3 nations and expanding it, allowed you to bring in little instances of things from other clans that kind of seemed like a niche in those clans, but now it's kind of like a main staple in this clan. And I like the fact that they kind of made Brandt Gate the main like set order nation. Like when we came into standard, it was already kind of weird that we were going down to 6 things, and then they had this 6 nations, and then they added in this whole new mechanic of orders. It felt like they had to kind of dictate one that was going to be like a primary use of it, and I think Brandt Gate has been perfect for, at least in the playstyles, and a lot of replication of like some of the encounter decks that we're gonna get to have kind of had a good spin-off with the set orders.
Yeah, it definitely helped give every nation their own identity when they dignified like Brandt Gate as the set order one, in that Stoicheia was also like the normal order nation, but they also had a lot of other stuff going on with it. With Brandt Gate, it's like a really, really tight package. Like, you know what you're gonna get out of most decks. And if you've watched our V-Road where we talked about like deck archetypes and stuff, Brandt Gate is like exemplifies the archetype of a oh man, what's it called? Deck thinning, compression deck. A compression deck. Yeah. They are the best at it because of how reliant on getting set orders is like both a good and bad thing. It's an innate strength of the clan that most of the way these decks works is that they want to get as many set orders out of their deck as possible to put in the order zone or what have you. But then there'll always be the thing of like, you're running a fair amount of them, so if you draw into them, you can brick defensively, and it can make games end really quickly or last a while, depending on how you draw into stuff.
Yeah, and it's not like every deck requires you to play them. I would say most of them do, and you're going to run into them. Like Messiah, I know that's kind of it's a stride deck, but it really doesn't use a whole lot of orders until it just got that promo a couple months back. But even then, it's not a set order, it's just a normal order. So that's just an instance of it. But yeah, you will run into, unfortunately, sometimes if you need multiple copies of things, you can brick on them. So
yeah, and on both sides of that spectrum, I guess we'll get right into it with the very first Brandt Gate deck we ever saw, which was Aurora Battle Princess. This deck set the stage for like the nation in that it was reliant on a set order to facilitate its main mechanic, which was imprisoning your opponent's stuff and letting them get stuff out of it later. But they did that with just letting you search for the one prison when you rode up to grade 1, and that was it. Like, you didn't have to worry about filtering your deck or anything. You could just play normal Vanguard. and then it just worked from there. It wasn't too bad.
Yeah, the prison to me is kind of a funny one still, because it's still like you have to rest a unit and soul charge 3 off of it. So it's like it kind of does a little bit of everything. It stops a little bit of rush, and it kind of can be a little annoying. Like if you're going first, you just rest your Vanguard and it's not the end of the world type thing. But if you're going second, like you have to force call like a trigger or another unit if you want to attack on that first grade 1 turn if you're going second. So it's kind of an interesting one, but the fact that this was kind of that first deck to kind of introduce set orders and actually have a set order that has a true mechanic, where it physically has its own abilities that you can do, and it's not even where you affect them, your opponent affects it. So created a really interesting mechanic early on.
Yeah, I know competitively this deck didn't really do a whole bunch. It was like a very niche, well, not niche because there weren't a ton of decks at the time, but it was very under the radar, like rogue deck that had some teeth in it in set 2 when it got its grade 2, that minus the cards that come out of the prison by 5k, which helped you grind your opponent out a bit, but it didn't pop off hard enough until we got the grade 4s, because Seraph Pure Light is still to this day like the best grade 4 from those first 5, and still sees like the success today, especially with all the support it's gotten recently.
Yeah, it's in the current state of the deck, it's a must-have 4 of in reality, and you have to run a card that lets you cheat it and get it. So it's just so dang good. The fact that it can imprison 6 things, 2 from hand, 2 from soul, 2 from drop, or 2 from board, not drop. It just is consistent, first off, because you're always going to do that. Sometimes you can miss on that skill by board or soul, but I mean, even the fact that disrupting soul can affect a lot of decks, like Vanguard, one we'll get to later, has to have its grade 0 in soul. So if you have a way of them using their soul and you're forcing that grade 0 out, you kind of shut the deck down. And that can happen with a couple other things and a couple situations on decks, but not crazy ridiculous, but still just the power and amount of what it wants to do, it's going to do. It's just really good.
Yeah, it's just very solid. And then the other deck we had that came out in set 1 was Orphist. Okay.
There it is.
Yeah, we'll mention it every episode somehow, I'm sure.
I mean,
yeah,
just about every episode, just about. It was bound to come eventually.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about this deck enough to fill a whole episode. But I wanted to see if you had anything you wanted to any impression you've had on the deck, I guess.
Well, I've always loved the aesthetic of it, and I love the fact that it has something in the game that we don't really see much anymore, and it kind of has like game states with Dark Knight and Abyssal Dark Knight. Like we had like Rush, which was like just kind of like a keyword to activate, like when Rush is active, it you did other abilities type things. But it's just kind of like a fun, like, okay, the game is in Abyssal Dark Knight. Like you had some of those effects, and that was like something from your set orders that just kind of was existing. And we don't really have that in any newer decks. Like no deck really has like a game state. So
yeah, getting
into the game early on when I was like learning, getting back into it around set 8 and standard, like it was one of those like, whoa, what is that? Like not what I was expecting, because we didn't really have that in GE, like at least when I was playing. Like I don't really recall anything like that. So bringing that into Orphist, was obviously a fun mechanic, and Orphist Mask was just so good when it came out, and was not consistent because it is a bricky deck, but it did everything it wants, and it was just really good. So no complaints there.
Yeah, it was the back and forth between Seraph and this deck, where this one kind of opened the floodgates for like the compression style of a deck, because it wanted a critical mass of orders in its order zone. Maybe not at first, but over time you would have to run enough to see them early to get to Abyssal Dark Knight that you would be running quite a few. So you, especially when you got to Regis, you got to a point where you had so many, and that only became more important when Mass came out, because he needed to ditch them from the order zone to the drop zone to make tokens, which was the other main gimmick of the deck, was making big tokens. That it kind of set him apart, I think, in like what other Brandt Gate decks followed after, to be like, okay, well, the Orphis player is just always going to check at least one trigger every turn. Like, it's just what you should expect. And in my opinion, that's what's good about the deck more than anything else, is you should just expect it'll always have that threat of checking a trigger, you know?
Yeah. I mean, deck thinning is deck winning, so when you do that in a lot of good ways, and especially the fact that it's had multiple form iterations, and they've all been like, you know, obviously original Orphis, looking at it now comparatively isn't that great.
Yeah.
Was a good card in set 1, definitely.
Oh, yeah.
Nowadays, you know, you still have the Mask version, you have Regis, people who are playing, I know your deck currently is back to a Regis edition versus a Mask edition, so, you know, it's kind of still very malleable in the deck building kind of side of it all, and there's always just more cards coming out and helping it, and it just Brandt Gate generics that are just good. I mean, cyclers in there are just crazy. You know, obviously they don't filter too much, but they do allow you to grab orders and things, so it's just overall a very good deck. I mean, anything that has a grade 1 that's 15k kind of as a quote unquote free unit that you can fairly consistently get. Yeah, I say free, but it's more like, you know, you can get them if you see like 1 or 2 cards, like, you know, you're gonna get them. Regis, you know, calls them based off of orders and things, like, so I say free. It's not, obviously you pay a cost to get them, but you're never worried. With what your
deck wants to do, so
yeah, so you're never worried about not seeing them. Like, if it's like a, you know, you run a card of like a 2 of and you don't see it in the 50 cards until you like your last 4 cards, like, you don't have that problem because they're just existing because they're tokens, so it's nice.
Yeah, I mean, we could, or I could at least go on about this deck forever, but what this deck set up for me as a standard player, I think, as far as it goes with me and Brandt Gate, it kind of peaked with Gravidia. This deck was, well, let's not mince words, this deck was tier like 0 when it came out. Not like, oh, it was that busted where like it was seeing the most representation or whatever, but like it was just so good out the gate. It kind of took what Orphis did with compressing its deck and turned it up to 11. Like, the sheer volume of orders it was taking out of its deck and putting into the order zone was like unheard of. And the fact that these meteors that she was getting from the deck to the order zone made you draw a card. So if you like Persona Road, you drew 3 cards. If you just rode up to grade 3, you drew 2 cards. Like, and every single, almost every single meteor that sat in your hand, if you didn't have like a critical mass of them, actually wasn't too bad. You could just get them in there and throw them at your opponent later, and it was just always really solid for as a 3 attack deck for a really long time. From the set 3 meta into set 4 and set 5 and set 6, like, this deck hung out for a really long time. This deck was very, very good.
Yeah, I mean, anything that, yeah, like you said, allows you to put a card in, draw, soul charge, and when it's actually activated, you get to retire a card and just, well, get the effects that Gravidia gives in its own right, with getting extra, you know, double trigger effects, extra pressure, getting a self-critical. Like, there are so many good things that the deck just kind of does innately on the card if you have your order set up, which, I mean, when you can run 16 of the grade 1 order, like, you're gonna see them in a 50 card deck, well, at that time 46 card deck, so like, just so good. Like, that's all it kind of came to. And getting into the game, it was a scary deck to play against because it was like they pull Brandt Gate OT here or a critical, I'm just dead.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of how it felt. Like you had it was a PG check every turn, and it's just like if you don't have the PGs, you die.
Yep.
That's what it felt like early.
And especially when it got like the grade 2 meteor that counted as 2 and just helped make the 5 or more claws on her on attack skill so much easier. Like trigger effect activating twice was unreal, especially in set 4. The same set that we got that grade 2 meteor was the grade 3 that was like on play Soul Blast 1, get a meteor from drop in order zone. That gave you such a more devastating late game than you already had, and was a big beater because I think it gave itself a crit as well or something like that. And it just not so much something that hangs around today. It hasn't really maybe it hasn't really caught up with everybody else, or people have just moved on to newer things. But I know that Gravidia Mask at least is not the best, not the worst, mind you. If you really want to be the champion of this deck, there is like a lot of recent support that can, you know, give you some creativity with its build now that it doesn't need to run as many meteors as it used to. But
yeah, I mean, part of it is people have moved past it because of, you know, better, brighter things essentially. But at the same time, it unfortunately has the downside of it does need to run a lot of meteors to be able to see them, to play them. Nowadays, you have a lot more cyclability, so like you can grab them and use them again and all kind of things like that. But I mean, when a lot of your cards just are orders and they don't have any shield, that innately makes you really bad against decks that draw a lot and just have a lot of shield. So it's kind of a catch-22 deck in reality. Like it's either you're gonna do exactly what you want and win the game, or you kind of lose. At least that's kind of how that deck feels to me.
Yeah, pretty much. More so than other Brandt Gate decks, I think. I think if you really compare the two, this deck has a much higher ceiling than Orphis, than most Brandt Gate decks, arguably, but a pretty low floor too. If you don't get much, if somehow you don't, like, you just don't draw into that grade 3, that grade 3 rearguard I mentioned, or just enough orders and see enough of them, like, in general, it's just like, it can be really tough. But that is kind of the risk you play with all these decks, so, you know.
Yeah, I would say it's the most high rolly Brandt Gate deck currently.
Yeah, but one that isn't high rolling is, you know, the lady.
Ava, Fountain of Knowledge. Knowledge.
Yep.
Ava, that chick. She, from the get go, just here's the thing. Anytime you can give a card that has a grade 3 shield, you already know the deck's gonna be good. Like, I just, the fact that you can run essentially everything in that deck other than your few set orders that you run and your persona rides that don't have shield, and everything else does have shield in the deck technically, that's just gotta be pretty good, right? Like, when you become a really tanky deck, when you have your grade 2 that gets an additional 5k shield and your grade 3 that just gets 10k shield, it's tough to go wrong there.
Yeah, it's interesting. The longer this, like, standard in general has gone on, the more it's like, can you do one of two things? Can you either put out enough pressure that you ask for so much shield of your opponent that you can arguably blow them out before they can even get prepared to properly defend against you, or can you naturally put yourself in a position where you're tanky enough to get to where you need to be to get the pressure back on the opponent? And this is like the deck that has that last one down pretty well. Like, the set orders that needs to run, you don't actually need to run very many of them, honestly. Like 5 or 6 or 8, like, at most. Like, you're running the grade 1 and the grade 3 And then I know lately people have been using the research order that finds monsters and stuff, so you can get your funny promo guy. But
yeah, and that's just new consistency side of things. But yeah, you're running the least amount of orders in most of these Brandt Gate decks. Like Archite runs typically just the 4, but
sure.
there's a couple others. But as a set order kind of heavy deck, where you have the grade 1 promo order that just allows your obscuries to not be retired, which that was crazy when that came out. Like that made the deck all the better in that time frame, as because it just added to its consistency. You always had the cards on board, you could intercept with them, and it didn't matter. But yeah, the fact that you search for two research orders from your ride line, you're already deck thinning a little bit. You have the grade 3 order that allows you just check the top 5 of your deck and call a card. So you're board building from a research order, and then you can rest your orders and get power. Every card is multi-purpose in that deck, and it's just consistent. Like that's the best way of saying it. You draw cards, you search deck for obscurities or hand. When you're attacking in the old version, if you're looking at Poison and Paradise Ava, you just search anywhere you want to, essentially, to call an obscurity. Like, obviously that's not 100% true, but you deck hand drop, you just are never going to run out of obscurities.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about how, like, when this deck first came out, it honestly wasn't that great, like, at all, because you were running, like, a crappy little grade 2 set order that could, like, bind stuff or whatever, and having a grade 2 set order meant that her axe didn't really dig too deep into your deck. And that mattered since this deck over time has become probably one of the easiest Brandt Gate decks to play, and one of the most effective compression style decks. It having an axe that gets a card out of the top axe, anything you want, like a PG, just something to guard with for later, an obscurate, and then calling an obscurate when she attacks. It's like that's 2 cards out of your deck every turn. It's not like a ton, but it really adds up, especially with the other ways it has of thinning its deck. But yeah, it's honestly, out of all of these, I think it's like probably the easiest to understand and just pick up, especially with the way it's been reprinted recently.
Yeah, actually, from going from such a heavy cost deck just to even pick up the obscurities themselves, because they were like the grade 3 obscurity was like $45 to $60 a card at one point. Like,
really,
it made it ridiculous to try to pick up. That's also just because, well, first off, it's Ava. She's got the waifu tax. So part of that is because of that, as well as just how fairly consistent you are, and if you make it to the late game, you kind of have all of the necessary shield and things that you need, and you just mega compress. So it just kind of did what it wanted. It was kind of like when Chrono Jet came out to me. Like, Chrono Jet just did what it wanted, and then you just had to try to beat it before it could do what it wanted, which is tough. So Ava's really good, in a good spot now, especially with the new form. Well, I say new form, the newer form of Ava, and the new promo that just came out a couple months ago.
Yeah.
So
and so far we've had some pretty, safe-ish Brandt Gate decks as far as like what they're trying to do. Just getting some orders out of the deck, maybe compressing here and there, but it got a little wackier in my opinion when we got to B Heroes, because they rocked a set order that could guard for you if you wanted to, and you could build up a base in your order zone that had all of these cards in it that you could either call out in your main phase or when you guard. And that was like the first time I saw a Brandt Gate deck kind of like think outside the box a little bit, and they're like, okay, these guys are all going into the order zone, but the order zone doesn't need to like represent something for the player, or something that just sits there and only like one player has to worry about, or both players if it's like prison or whatever. It's like, it's a thing that's pretty pretty versatile in both like offense and defense.
Yeah, and with B heroes, it kind of changed up the style of compression of how the decks kind of operated. So like most of the decks before this have kind of said, I'm going to, Ava's kind of in the same stance, but I'm going to filter out my set orders, and then everything else will be pieces like units and triggers. Whereas Gianos specifically filters out B heroes. Like it's like, hey, we're going to try to get 12 B heroes out of the deck to hand into the order zone. And then from there, you can have your triggers and whatever else you were running in there. So if you get all 4 of your orders out of the deck, which you hope to do, then you're trying to get 3 heroes out of the deck each time you play an order. It made filtering the deck pretty easy, and early and often, because you could do it from grade 1. Like having a grade 1 base made it so early in the start of that process, when a lot of other decks at this point we're kind of waiting until like turn 2, turn 3 to start that process, including like Ava.
I don't remember them having a grade 1 base.
It is a grade 2 base. I lied.
You're good.
My brain was thinking, and even then it's still wrong. 0. I'm thinking of Dayusha. That's a different story.
Oh, sure.
We'll get to that one. But that's 0. Either way, you can cheat in the newer version of it. You can cheat like 3 orders out in one turn. And that's a whole story.
Might as well be a grade 1 order at that point.
Correct, yeah, because it feels like it. Because by the time you're at grade 3, you have the opportunity to have your 4th order in there that turn. So, yeah, that's
Yeah, I think this was one of the. This is like the first time out after a little bit where we had sort of a Brandt Gate deck do quite a bit early. Like Orphis early game was already pretty good. It had the grade 2 set order that made a token when it was placed, and that made your turn 2 pretty effective. And even some other Brandt Gate decks like Gravidia ended up using that for themselves, which showed about how not so xenophobic the decks in the nation were, but just how much they wanted to tie to their own set orders. But then we came to this deck where, when it came out, it was honestly pretty bad, if I'm being real. It wasn't the greatest. It just didn't have enough B heroes to exploit the mechanics of the deck. But nowadays, this deck is like probably the best example of like a Brandt Gate aggro deck. Like the grade 2 game on this deck is actually kind of ridiculous sometimes. It can do 5 attacks, I think, somehow, like a grade 2 if you give them enough resources. So it just has that going for it, which is at least something, you know.
Yeah. So this deck is one of the one decks that anytime anyone is like, hey, I'm going to hit you, yeah, please do crit me, like let me get like 4 counterblasts going into my grade 2.
Yeah,
because I will use all of that and I will try to kill you on my grade 2. Like, in the current state of it, obviously, with having a couple cards that allow you to cheat bases from hand or drop, or even search the deck for one, like it's gotten not a whole lot of help, I would say, but it's gotten enough important pieces that allow you to get to your really what you want is those 3 bases in your order zone. So it makes your grade 3 better innately just because you have to have 3 bases in there. So having, more B heroes is never a bad thing either, because it's just more things you can pull out of the deck. Unless you're me, when you play this deck and you check your top 7 when you play the base and you just see maybe 1 B hero in that, which is very unlucky when you run everything but 20 cards of the deck essentially as B heroes. Yeah, it's just rough. That's just me though, so don't be me.
Yeah, and going into the next one is kind of bouncing back and forth here, because we'll mostly be talking about the newest version of the deck, but Welstra coming out, and I think it had to be like set 7 it was set 7. He came out in set 7. He was pretty unique and I know you've had a lot of history with this deck, so
Yeah, this one, so it again kind of adds in a whole new style of set order. Like the fact that these set orders, are operable. Like you use them to do effects with them, but you trigger them based off of other cards. Like you don't use the skill on the order itself to do what it needs to do. Like you have to actually like use another card to trigger it. Was such a interesting mechanic to me, and I also loved the whole like kind of mobile fortress like look of it all, just because I mean, who doesn't love big spaceships? Like, let's be honest. So that was part of it, but the fact that you can also call a set order to your board as an unit that can attack, it's so interesting as a mechanic. Fry Shoots Maximum is a ridiculously good card. Obviously there are more products than there was before Fry Shoots Maximum. They weren't all that great. The little cannons and things, like, they were fun, did a little damage, add a little power here and there, whatever. But adding in this new mechanic where you spend a lot of resources to trigger these set orders to do it, and you can do them multiple times, made it really fun. Like, it gave set orders that, like I said, new mechanic that, how do I want to put it? It just, it created a whole new playing archetype, and I'm sure they will expand on it and give someone else something similar in Brandt Gate soonish. Not trying to, get away from the products, but right now I think the products are in a good spot because it's a pretty set package in reality of products right now. The craziest thing is the grade 1 promo order that we've got can change up here and there. But Iron Garden is typically ran at 1, sometimes 2, just preference of style. So
yeah, it definitely had something really strong going for it, being the set orders that had repeatable skills, and especially when one of them retired one of your opponent's rear guards and gave their Vanguard minus 5k for the turn. When you did that enough times, I don't know how to describe it. It was insane. Like when you gave your opponent like minus 10k, if you did it enough times, which you could even back at the original Welstra. But the only thing that kind of stopped him when he came out was enough cards that really operated, and especially cards that operated even if you've already operated that turn. A lot of the rear guards that deck had would say, oh, if you haven't operated a set order this turn, operate one. I can't believe how many times I read that clause on a rear guard until they finally got to a point around set 9 or so where they just got cards that could do it. And in the battle phase as well, Freiheit is just like the best card that deck has ever gotten, and made that deck like a 5 attack deck.
Deck would not be any good, I don't think, if it didn't have Freiheit. Like, Freiheit carries in a lot of instances in the fact that it, well, first off, allows you to even put Fry Shoots Maximum into your order zone in the first place, because you don't really get that. With Blitz Arm and the Divine Skill, you do have that Divine Skill. You have the option to do it, but that's a different story. But beforehand, Fry Shoots Maximum would have never worked without Freiheit, so that's a good thing. But yeah, a lot of instances of operating things in a specific order. Now it's a lot more loose, and you can kind of change things up. Most of it kind of went from you operate like 1 in your main phase, maybe 2, to now most of it's almost all during your battle phase, which I think is fine. Now they're used more as weapons of death versus weapons of consistency. But again, it's just kind of depending on if you run Virginas, you can still enact things in the main phase versus if you run Troll, you can do them more in the battle phase for kind of a similar effect. So it's really preferential to play style. As much as the set order package is kind of set up, and locked in, the rest of the units in the deck aren't, because you can still adjust the playstyle based off the units that operate them. So
yeah,
pretty nice.
And leading into, I believe it was set 8, was another deck that kind of decided to do like a B hero thing in a way, but more harder into like the compression angle of it, instead of just getting cards into the order zone for a specific reason. At least that's how I always viewed it, because it tried really hard to compress a lot, and then reward you for compressing enough, especially if you compress certain things into your order zone. And that was Archetype. Also just a very good deck nowadays with her newest form she just got in set 3.
Yeah. Being a deck that, well, first off, searches for 2 guaranteed of your orders, and that essentially just allows you to check the top of your deck to add 1 to hand and 1 to your drop, means you're really kind of getting 2 cards out of your deck every turn on the minimum. But it was a very unique when it came out, because I like to call it like a Pokemon deck, because it was like, oh hey, I have all these monsters and I need to have them, and I gotta like use them in specific orders to make them good. And it was more just kind of a joke that it was Pokemon, but having little monsters kind of made it especially interesting in the deck building aspect, because were a lot of monsters, and obviously there are many more now, and it kind of changes things. But having to have multiple play sets of each like monster, like you wanted to have a full play set of things. So sometimes you could drop it down to 3, but for consistency's sake, you had to run a full play set. And unfortunately, when one of its best cards when it came out was Cyclogade, that was just a, hey, I'm a monster and 10k shield. That's pretty much all it said. So it's gotten so much better into its newest edition, where now it actually has another monster that just allows you to get a critical and power, and it's just really, really good. But I'm glad the deck has changed from cycling things from your order zone into your deck to now actually being something that cycles things from your drop to your order zone and then back to drop. Like, it allows you to, once you've already filtered those things out of the deck, you're not putting them back and screwing up your compression.
Yeah, it's it definitely is one of those decks that makes you play a little mini game where you need to match the names of cards in your order zone and cards on your board to buff them. But it along with that makes it a very resource management intensive deck. And for the people who like those decks, they really like ride or die with a deck like this. Like, I know plenty of people who just really love Archetype and like playing it, even back when it wasn't too great when it first came out. And they stick around to now when that deck is actually very good, very, very playable, can put up a really clean fight. And it's always nice to see that with a Vanguard deck, where like the people who go into it for what the deck is end up getting to a point with it where it can go with the best. And I think that I hope for that with every Vanguard deck at some point.
Yeah, every deck in the game deserves a little bit of love, because at some point in time and somewhere, there's someone who loves the deck and still holds on to it, except for Eugene. Everyone's given up on that deck. True, but that's a different story. we got Greedon instead, so it's fine. Or yeah. Gandiva, not Greedon. Cool.
But after that, in set 9, it's a deck I always have like a distant respect for, in that it's been the one Overlord-esque deck in Brandt Gate, and that's Vanguard. And yeah, I think there was always a part of me that wished I built and played this deck, but what I think about it now is just a deck that really wanted to do its own thing, and still does, in being very, very, very Vanguard selfish, and everything keying off of what the Vanguard's doing. Like, your set orders are giving your Vanguard like extra effects, and he needs to like put those set orders in his soul to get going, and can sometimes stack those effects with the new grade 3 he's got. So it's just a very out there spin on a Brandt Gate deck, I think.
Yeah, it was kind of like I want to say the biggest step away from set orders, like being the heavy focus of decks in Brandt Gate, at least in my opinion, because they were more like assisting effects, whereas like Archai and Ava and all these things like had a lot of main effects that they had to you had to use to contribute to the deck, whereas this one was like, all right, you get power every time your Vanguard swings, or okay, they can't intercept or play blitz orders.
It's like set orders being the engine of the deck, but in this one it's not the engine, it's just fuel, you know.
Yeah, exactly. It's more a major assistance. But yeah, being a deck that has an effect where it's a on hit or persona ride,
yeah,
was kind of an interesting thing to read at first, because it really made you like glad first off that you don't have to always on hit, because then people just PG it every time, and then your whole point of freestanding Vanguard is destroyed. So it's a tough deck to love. It's fun to play and it's interesting. It's tough to love because of its inconsistency and the fact that you use a lot of resources and you don't recuperate near enough to warrant it, I think. But for 3 Vanguard attacks, it's pretty deadly. It makes it really fun. So
yeah, it's definitely falling in line with the piece our reliant CEO like Brandt Gate decks. And then like nowadays it needs to find the right set orders. It needs to get into the order zone to build up for its big turn where it goes into Avant-Garde Richter. And so you need to find that card as well. And you need a Persona Road as well. So you need to find a Persona Road copy. And then you need to make sure you have the rear guards that can benefit off of your Vanguard attacking 3 times. It's a lot. It's not enough to make the deck unplayable by any means, but it definitely needs you to play very handily with like your opening hand and what you need to draw into and stuff like that.
I think probably the most piece reliant deck in current Vanguard, I think. Like I mean,
and after that we got the not Brandt Gate deck, Messiah.
The Brandt Gate, not Brandt Gate.
Yeah.
Really just Stargate. So yeah, it's fine. But Link Joker, Messiah, does a lot of things similar to what it did in G. It has strides, always just, a 26k beater, so that's always fun. Not 28k beater. So it just hits good numbers. It locks 1 or 2 things here or there. It restands stuff, and it still draws a bunch, so not too much different.
It sure is like Cronin. It sure is just a G deck they put in standard. Like it doesn't. Yeah, the standard cards it's gotten never really took it away from what it used to do, which was locking its own stuff and then unlocking them so they could attack again and stuff like that. Like, it's just good. Like, there isn't too much to say about this one. It's never really been bad, I think. It's really hard for a stride deck to be bad. This one definitely is the most underrated one, though, I think. Like, Chrono Jack got a lot of attention around the time it came out, and it still comes up here and there. And, Shoujo Doji and Luarn are, like, some of the top cheeses right now, but this guy has enough going on where his own thing is kind of contained to him. Of course, you can run the cards that will, like, lock themselves after the attack or what have you, but it's actually, there's a lot of weird builds for this deck that are using a lot of, like, random set orders, and it seems to be fine, but in a deck that doesn't need to brick ever, really, I don't know if I would risk that level of consistency for it,
Yeah, and it luckily has the advantage where most of these decks that are released as stride decks just kind of use what come in them. Like, you can replace a couple cards here and there because there are a couple cards that just are not worth it. But for the most part, they're fairly, open from the box. They just work. So, yeah, it's just good, to say the least.
Yeah, and then, after this one, we got arguably Trey's favorite deck of all time.
It's up there. I would say it may be one of my favorite decks currently. It is a super. Well, first off, I'm glad that they kind of took a step away for a second with this one and said, hey, all these decks have been kind of from the anime or have been from previous iterations of the anime, but this one came from the manga specific, which is nice that they took that main character's card and deck and actually brought it into standard and have actually shown it love and support. It hasn't gotten a whole lot, but the fact that it got 3 new cards in set 3 here, where 2 of the cards are must-have playsets and one of them's kind of up in the air about actually how good it is, and it kind of brings back a little bit of a fun mechanic in the Quintet wall kind of aesthetic. I mean, it's only max of 4 cards, but you get the idea. It uses your arms to guard, but adds one of those new mechanics where it's not really necessarily set order focused as heavy as other things. It uses your set orders to kind of recuperate your arms, which is the big mechanic of this one. Attaching and detaching from the Vanguard to give a bunch of power and multiple attacks. So kind of again, that nice step away from like the heavy set order usage, but uses it enough to be Brandt Gate.
Yeah, it definitely went out of the box with what a Brandt Gate deck could be, in the same way that like Heroes and I want to say like Welstra did, where it just wanted to do something unique mechanically, in like operating or stuff like that, where this one is like kind of doing a buff Sagra thing where it's taking some cards and they're not even orders, they're just rear guards, and they just attach them to this guy, and he gets effects from them, which is just, it's always been a design space that I'm glad they've dipped into a lot, especially with how it interacts with like they're sharing their power with each other, and if you check like one trigger and put it on even one card, it buffs all of them, and then you can just have a big like checking a front is just insane in this deck. Like I've seen Trey hit me with like 80k Vanguards. Like it's definitely one of the Brandt Gate decks up there with like Gravidia and maybe Prison to an extent, where like it's always asking for a PG usually, and it's always threatening some sort of innate pressure from the Vanguard that needs to be respected, and that's nice to see in a deck that's in a nation that's trying to do a lot of different stuff.
Yeah, it kind of adds just an interesting like kind of thought process of like what that deck does. Like kind of adds to that imagination. Like you have to imagine these arms are detached and they're like flying around trying to hit you just to do a little poke damage here and there, and then they finally all link back up to actually do what the deck wants to do and be that main like heavy Vanguard attack, and then afterwards they kind of detach and do their own little thing again. Like it's such a fun little mechanic, and first off, just so stinking cute. The grade 0 is just like the cutest fucking little spaceman ever, and it's so good. So it's hard to go wrong.
Yep. But now we go into, always fair to mention, I think, and especially when it comes to Brandt Gate, the start deck that came out at the beginning of Divines, like Astrum actually isn't, out of all of the start decks, this guy's actually not terrible. Like he definitely doesn't draw like at all, and he's really tight on his resources, but his numbers are very big, and he does get 5 attacks on like turn 4 onward if you play it right. So he's just been a weird kind of thing going on.
He's kind of got the advantage of, I don't think Brandt Gate has the best like generics, but it has enough generics in the Brandt Gate atmosphere that are just good for the deck. Like obviously the gun cyclers are just good overall energy. You don't really use the energy, but counterblast, it's more shield, it's more draw. If you need to use the secondary effect on a Persona Ride turn in a deck that always has its Persona Ride, it's just a good thing. But then you have things like Bulbul Mine, because the deck is kind of counterblast heavy. You're counterblasting once to search for your Persona ride, and then you're counterblasting once to play the set order. So I mean, Bulbul Mines being in that deck is just so good. So like that's that. I mean, it has an open play space because like it's not anything focused. Like it doesn't target any sort of like blitz or like any specific code name other than just having Asterm, and it just restands. So it's one of the ones where it's really just open to do whatever you want it to do. Like if you want to play towards a certain style of defensiveness, you can, but you don't have to, type thing.
Yeah, I think the deck space on this is definitely not that tight, but how you need to handle your resources is very tight. Like I think Bulbul Mine is like very, very necessary for the deck, almost like borderlines on unplayable without it, I think. But if you really love how this guy looks like I do, and you really want to just like put all of the generics you can into making it draw enough to live past, you know, a typical like turn 4 or so, it can get pretty big. When it stands a rear guard and you have enough set orders in there, you can give like itself and the rear guard used to like 15k and get like 5 attacks, and it's just fine. It's just solid. It does what you would want a Brandt Gate deck to do, I think, at a baseline.
Yeah, and the fact that it's our base trial deck and all of the support for it is so cheap, where you can buy the trial deck itself and all of the support for like sub $30. I mean, we talked about those in our budget video, but it's just good for what it is.
Always an upside.
Yeah.
But from one battle roid to another. Yeah, I know this is one of your pet decks right now, a Rotovisor.
I love it so much, but also
it looks
hate
very
it
cool.
so much.
Yeah.
Best. Okay, this might be a hot take. Best looking silver rare in the game.
That's tough. I don't know. I'm looking at the Sacrifice Glass one right now, and that one's pretty good.
Don't get me wrong. Sacrifice Glass looks great, but the blue with the silver text and silver, there's nothing, in my opinion, that's currently as a better silver rare. There are better SECs and whatever. That's a different story. But SR, I think it's one of the best. But my biggest problem with this deck is CB2. So just a little tough there, because it's kind of easy to play around in reality. But this one has a fun mechanic with its set orders and really kind of leans into getting your set orders out of your deck as best as you can and as fast as you can, and then them giving a red text skill. Like you use the effect from it and you rest your order, so you know you've used it, but you give a unit a red text skill, so when it on hits that you can counter charge or energy charge to. It's just kind of a fun thing. Like there's a lot of decks and cards that just have on hit effects, but the fact that each card you can run in the deck still has their effects, but then you just give them one additional skill with those set order, makes it kind of fun. Like I said, it feels bad when your opponent's just like, I'll take your Vanguard, like whatever, restand your stuff, but I'm gonna guard everything that like allows you to recuperate your resources. So if you're not running Bulbul Mines and you're not running like anything that can help you countercharge, like honestly, Radiance Caliburn I feel like is almost a must-have in this deck.
Yeah, honestly. It
Just
definitely makes your imagination run wild, and with that whole thing you said about the set order. Like, obviously there's like the other Rotovisors that you would put in this deck that can help it out the most, but running like Abent Robust or something and giving it like that on hit is just it seems cool. Like it definitely has a really good foundation, I think. It's just CB2 is always weird. You know, it's been in enough decks now that have like a stipulation with it where if something hits or you do this or that, like you can countercharge here and there, but I feel like it's not doing enough to where countercharging should be that hard. I hope gets something that can help it counter charge way easier.
And well, I don't even necessarily think it needs something that's like specifically says counter charge on it. I think it needs to have like a card that's like when it's placed from hand, reduce the cost of Rotovisor's skill by one counterblast or something like that. Something to just like say, hey, you can't do this a whole lot because there's not a whole lot of recuperation in the deck from once you lose your board, it's kind of gone. So like you get that once a turn type thing. I think it obviously should be like a limited one, so that'd be kind of tough to like. It shouldn't be like -1. It should be like set the counterblast cost to 1 or something, so you can't play like
so you
2
can't like spam it. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, can't play like 2 in a turn or something to reduce it to 0. Like it still should have a cost effect to it, but it 2 is a lot. It feels like it should almost feel like it should be a set 5 deck, but that's a different story.
Oh sure. Now going into way more recent territory, is good old fashioned straight back from Boomer Vanguard Dayusha. He's definitely not doing what Boomer Dayusha did. Like he's not quite DP. He's definitely a modern take on Dimension of Police.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. There's still a lot more playing with it that really needs to be done, but it's so piece reliant that it's kind of fun because it's not like when you think of piece reliant decks, it typically is like kind of tough because you're like you have to see these pieces, but in this piece reliant deck you just kind of see the pieces or you have the ability to search for those pieces, so it's kind of like, I don't know, doesn't feel bad.
It's like the difference between like, oh, if I don't find this piece or this piece, I literally don't get to do anything, versus, you know, it's like a combined robot, you know, like the whole gimmick is that they all combine into this guy. So I gotta find them all. I gotta make sure they can all combine into the Zood, and like that kind of way to look at it makes it really fun to look for the pieces, probably, than just being like, oh man, if I don't get this set order, then I can't do anything this turn or whatever.
Yeah, and the best part about it is it has, from its set order, is such a like recuperation ability, because literally you just rest your order and you take a card from drop and you shove it to soul. So like a piece gets retired, okay, sure, you'll get it back. Obviously it kind of falls to binds a little bit, but if you're running the deck like you kind of should and you have multiples of each of them, you know, it kind of gets a little redundant when you have some of them. But the fact that you can kind of balance energy in a very interesting way, because you get 1 energy for putting a card into soul, and then you can spend 2 to call a card from soul. So like you're kind of in that balance of, I need to like put 2 cards in soul to call 1 type thing, but you're gaining 3 energy a turn, so even if you just use and rest 1, you can call 2 from soul every turn. So like having 2 orders is like what you want, like at a minimum in a sense, but at the same time that's also not crazy hard. So
yeah, it definitely does a lot for something not too bad. I think I know it can superior ride. Yeah,
well, the fact it could just skip a grade essentially is nice, but you do have to have all the different named units, so that's where it comes to that piece reliancy. But it's kind of nice that it's from a grade 1 effect that you get to do. It's not like on the grade 3, like it's on the grade 1 that gets rode by the grade 2, and then you can do it, and it's like, okay. So skipping is kind of nice. It still kind of has like a little bit of curse text on it. Curse text, air quote. Sure. But it's just kind of fun. I think it's not a bad iteration or retake on Dimension Police. I think it's still a fun and keeps it more towards what Standard prefers versus what G preferred for.
Yeah, that's fair. It definitely kept the essence of a Dimension Police. It's still very reliant on what the Vanguard wants to do, but definitely kind of made it more in the sense of a modern Standard deck.
Yeah, and it kind of has a semi-divine skill.
Yeah.
With its restand and get extra drive and things. So, it's kind of fun that it is still so piece reliant. And if you just really love the aesthetic of old Dimension Police, this hits all those niches. Like it does it.
They did that pretty well, I think.
Just love it.
Yeah, and then to round this off is the most recent Brandt Gate boss, being the Destined one, Impaldio. Very strange. It's the only one that makes a set order token, and that set order token doesn't really do too much for you besides represent a gauge that your cards would key off of, and also give you sort of a defensive play in how you end up checking triggers versus non-triggers, and how that can help you get to a point to where your Vanguard just has a crit and 2 more drive checks, and like you only get that one turn. But I guess the idea is with it and its rear guard that can also drive check on the rear guard circle, you're just trying to do the Gravidia thing. You're just trying to kill them with triggers, and not so much sack, but like in the instance where this deck is built to do it, like it's not so much that it's bad that it's choreographed, but it is definitely, you can tell that's what the deck wants to do when your Vanguard says 5+2 on it, which is just very weird and silly to see.
Mm-hmm. I think it's, and maybe I'm crazy, but I think it is the most current iteration of an OTK that we have in Standard.
Sure.
Like it feels like the deck's like, hey, I'm gonna put some pressure on you this entire game, but then when I go to use my divine skill, I'm really hard pushing it to kill you this turn. Like I'm gonna filter out my deck, try to get it down to 16 triggers in deck, like type thing, and just go to town on you. So I don't know. I am very looking forward to it. It's going to be a goofy looking deck in reality, and Paulio himself just is kind of
there's
big horn-headed.
Like a hit and a miss here. I think it's not quite all the way where like most Sprint or most Battleroid enjoyers would like to be, but it's not terrible. It's got a cool gun.
No, he's just goofy, and I like it.
Yeah.
So I'm excited for it. I do look forward to him coming out and actually getting to build it and play it. But yeah, just goofy.
Yeah, goofy. Yeah, just goofy. Just goofy. That's it. That's what he is.
That's the best way to describe him.
Yep. And I think with that, that takes us to the current incarnation of a Brandt Gate deck, and with that, we can kind of understand now that they're all pretty cohesive with each other. I think all of them are really kind of going on the same road, and they're driving really close to each other, and they're all kind of making sure that their generic cards can help them all out. There are definitely some nations we'll get to at some point where, they don't exactly have something like set orders that they can all key off of and help in any which way, but it definitely makes a very tightly designed nation, I think, in a good way.
Yeah, and it kind of is nice because there aren't a whole lot of just generic set triggers, or set orders, not set triggers, which is kind of nice. There are, some ones that you can kind of intermingle between decks and things, but it kind of like locks the set triggers into doing what they want with the deck that they need to be in, type thing, to really make it get their use out of. So it kind of sucks in that sense, but also is nice, whereas all of your generics really kind of come from your main units. Like Wavy Loss literally just says research orders, so it works in Ava and in Archite. But that kind of makes sense lore wise for that deck in general, but little things like that, having multiple set orders. There's the new grade 1 from set 1. That was the set 2.
Yeah, set 2.
That it just like says, hey, if you have a set order, shove it to soul and check top 5 for a grade 2 or greater. Like, Like that's such a good generic card.
Even like really early in standard, we had Tectian. We were like, when you discarded during your turn, you could check the top 5 for set order. Very solid. And recently I noticed a lot of decks like to use that grade 1, that when you play like a grade 2 or greater set order, you can go into soul and you can draw a card, which is very nice. Yeah. Always trying to fight back against the inherent not so much weakness, but a requirement of a Brandt Gate deck needing to use set orders in some way. And I think it has had a pretty good run so far, I think, with what it wants to do, and I think it got there at the end. So
yeah, and they're gonna keep releasing them, and they're gonna keep releasing new set orders, and we're gonna keep loving them. So
yeah. Yep.
That's all that matters.
Yep. And with that, we've reached the end of today's V-Road. If you watched all the way through, thanks. If you like this kind of stuff, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel to keep up with the other ones we'll make. And to make sure you don't miss them, you gotta hit that bell. And be sure to check out the V-Road playlist for all the other episodes we've got. Got quite a few now, actually. We've been doing this for a little bit. And also our other side content we have with like our quizzes and our deck text and set text for set 3 that covered one of the decks we mentioned here. But until next time, I was Cole.
I was Trey.
And we'll see you in the next one.